Welcome back to another episode of Beers with Max Live. We've got 20 unsuspecting bystanders here, and I hope they leave smarter than they came. Everyone's got their beer. We've got Tamsen Webster here today. Tamsen Webster,
Hello,
everybody.
hello. Does
The
not have a beer.
the Duchess of Messaging. What do you call you? What's the proper intro?
I don't know. Some idea whisperer is what one of my clients called me once, and I think I'd like that. I'll roll with that.
It's stuck. I saw that I saw that in a public appearance. So the reason why I'm excited to have Tamsen on, aside from her general brilliance, is that I've seen the market for ideas kind of go up. Like in the marketing space, we all really enjoy, that we know like 8 million and one things that clients can do to market themselves. But in these times, it's become really important as budgets shrink to identify the one idea that's really going to make a difference. And having that idea is worth nothing if we can't communicate it. So everyone here, especially if you've talked to me recently, everyone here is coming up with a brilliant idea that's going to help their existing clients, that's going to pay it forward for clients that have put you on pause, and it's going to be your excuse for going out and building some new relationships. And Tamsen, that's why I thought it was the perfect time to bring you in to help people crystallize that minimum viable message.
Excellent. Well, hello. Yeah, it's something I see a lot. I mean, I work a lot. I work primarily with founders, academics and experts, and thought leaders. And generally for folks who want to slide, like they're in one and they want to slide into another space. So yeah, I spend a lot of time working with folks usually on how to make their sophisticated ideas simple enough for other people to understand. So I think probably the other way you can describe me is an English to English translator, which is where I spend most of my time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, which is a fun thing to, it's a fun thing to do. It's a good way to be. But what I find oftentimes is a lot of times when people are talking about their ideas, they tend to focus more on what makes those ideas strong rather than the structure of the idea. And the thing is, the way that people come to understand information is that they have to build understanding piece by piece. They have to kind of get these little yeses, little concepts that build up over time. And so if we can actually fill in those blanks that people's brains are looking for, we're actually building a structure that gives strength. And so that's largely what I try to help people do, is figure out A, what are those blanks that people's brains are always looking for anyway? And then B, how do we fill those in with our idea so that they make sense and get all those yeses that we're looking for? So that's kind of overview.
I tell you what, Tamsen, you changed my life during the interview on Beers with Max. You were telling me about your red thread methodology. I probably should have cut you a fat check for that one, but immediately I left and I was like, oh my God, everything's wrong. I got to change everything. Granted, people still don't know what I'm talking about, but it had a profound effect. And says Lawson's laughing because he's a messaging and positioning consultant as well. But look, for Beers with Max, everybody, you're here. We're all drinking. This is our time. I know a bunch of you have questions. I saw it in your LinkedIn thing. So feel free. Do interrupt. Keep yourself on mute if you've got nothing to say for noise pollution wise. And if you want to share what you're drinking, if it's your first time here, just say like literally 2 words about what you do. Try and have a succinct message, huh? And, but yeah, Tamsen, I mean, I would love for people to get a sense of what the red thread methodology actually is and some of those structural elements before we leave, but I want to get everyone involved. This is for them.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Yes. Well, the first time I think it started is I'm not drinking beer. You and I talked about this the last time, Max, but like not a fan of beer, mostly because beer is not a fan of me. I'm actually allergic to brewer's yeast. So I'm having, and I thought this is appropriate, a last word. A delicious cocktail for anyone who's interested.
A last word. I was interviewing someone on Beers with Max yesterday. They had tequila and espresso. It was a tequila and espresso martini. I said that too. He swore by it though. So now I've got my weekend agenda and I hope to see you all on Monday.
It seems like very like oppositional, right?
Yeah, no,
You've
I
got the
was like,
caffeine and the alcohol at the same time.
if it makes me
Does it create
cringe,
balance?
you're in trouble.
Possibly. Yeah, no, this is gin, green chartreuse, Luxardo, which is a maraschino liqueur, not to be confused with what the cherries sit in, lime juice, and it's delicious. It's one of my favorites. A
Wowzer.
rabid greyhound. What the heck is a rabid greyhound? Now I want to know.
Well, for those of you just joining us, to avoid public shunning, look at this. I've had 2 sips and I'm already beside myself. It's your fault, Tamsen. I'm starstruck. But do come on video here. If you'll notice, if you're one of the people not on video, you're one of the 2. Not to single anybody out. At least there's 2 of you. David Dom, ladies and gentlemen. So yes, Tamsen, I've found that we either need a controlled pause, 5 seconds will do, or you just go ahead and start talking, and some of the people that are accustomed to being here hopefully will interrupt you at some point.
Okay, sure. So I think the best place to start actually is, I don't know, why is it that we need a structure for talking about our ideas? And I think one of the biggest things is, a lot of times, maybe you're different, but I think a lot of times, even though we get asked the question all the time, what is your idea, or what is it, and why should I care? Many of us struggle to find an answer that feels comfortable, that doesn't feel like some kind of recited script, that actually gets across what we think is powerful about the idea. And so, if for no other reason, I think it's powerful to have a structure for talking about your ideas, so that you always have a go-to. You never feel in that moment when someone says, oh, what should I say, that you don't have an answer to that. So that structure allows you to always do that. That, of course, raises the question, well, what is that structure? And so one thing that's important to know, and probably a lot of your people know this already, is that the way that we as humans make sense of information is through kind of creating stories about things. We actually put things in story structure. We try to figure out, well, who are the characters and what's motivating them and what's happening. We're using stories constantly and pre-consciously to figure out cause and effect. So the idea is, if you can put your idea into story structure, 2 things will happen. One is, it's pretty much guaranteed to make more sense to people, because that's what their brains are looking for. And then second, it's much more likely that you're going to communicate that idea without any distortion, because their brains aren't trying to fill in any missing blanks. So at the highest level, the red thread is really just a way to kind of to find what are those elements of story structure in how you talk about your idea, so that it's a lot easier for you to talk about it. So that's the kind of first thing I'd say. Steve Lashansky. Steve, you've had a lot of Tamsen this week, Steve, so I'm proud of you.
Tamsen, I want to use this opportunity to set the expectation here. Folks, if you've got something to say, the chat's not the place to say it. Hit that unmute button. Give us your voice. Give us your presence. Please interrupt. That's what we're doing here. That's why we're drinking beer. It's all safe. And right. Barry Stahl, I just ask that everybody, I know you're hi, Barry. Nice to meet you. If everyone could keep themselves on mute, self-help on the mute button when you're not talking, that'll help keep the noise pollution down. But Steve Lashansky, everybody, you got a question there.
Yeah, Tamsen. So what's the biggest challenge for people to get clear on the red thread? Because, the fundamentals seem so simple, and of course, simple is different than easy. What do you find really gets in the way of people to be able to get that kind of clarity?
The biggest thing that gets in the way of whether it's the red thread or really just an answer for other folks that works about your idea is that what gets in the way is your own expertise on your idea. So, well-known psychological problem called the curse of knowledge, right? Which is the situation where it is impossible for you to imagine what it's like not to know the thing that you know. And when you have an idea, and by idea, I can mean a concept, a product or service, because even a product or service represents an idea. When you have an idea, like you have become so convinced of it and so expert on it that oftentimes it's very, very difficult for you to think about how somebody who knows nothing about it and who is not yet convinced about it, how they would see it and what their objections are. So I think that's the biggest problem that people have just talking about their ideas is, assuming an inexpert point of view to start. Because if you start from the expert point of view, you do a couple things that get in your way. One, you tend to talk about way too many details of the idea. You tend to get into the weeds of it. You tend to start giving people turn-by-turn directions when they don't even know what the map looks like. They have no idea like where you're trying to send them, but you're like down into the details of like, oh, here's how my model works, or here, if you press this button, this thing's going to happen. They're like, wait, no, what does it do? And then the second thing that happens as a result of starting kind of as an expert, a convinced expert on your idea, is that you forget to actually make the case for your idea. You kind of say, well, this is clearly the answer to the problem that you have. And people are like, wait, but what problem do I have? And why is it the right answer? So I'd say kind of at a philosophical level, that's kind of the highest obstacle to figuring out like how to talk to somebody about your idea in a really effective way.
So Tamsen, first of all, brilliant answer. Probably because I agree with you. But
yes.
The real question is, how do you help people get outside their expertise and their own glasses in which they see the world? I think that's really the critical thing that you do so brilliantly.
Oh, thanks. Well, I think one of the key things, so I can answer this two ways. One is the behind the curtain way, which is like why I do a thing. And then the second is the what. So let me start with the what, because usually that's what people are most interested in. And so the what version of what I suggest people do is, at the very, very simplest, it's, I have people say, okay, let's just assume your idea, your concept, your product or service is an answer. If it's an answer to something, then there must be a question, right? And there must be a question that people are asking. And so one of the very first things that I have people do just to get themselves out of their own head is actually establish that question. Because I've had conversations with clients where I rarely ask them that. I'm like, well, okay, this is a great idea, but what problem does it solve? Like, what question does an audience have right now that this is an answer to? And they're like, I don't know. So step one, make sure that you have some clarity around if your idea is an answer, it's a way to solve a problem, meet a goal, achieve a need, right? Like fulfill a need. What is a question that people are asking right now? Not the one that you wish they were asking, but it's a question they're asking right now that can help them do that. So that's kind of a basic way to start. Tactically, I would say, see if you can fill in the answer, the blanks to this phrase. When I'm talking with blank number one, people that you talk to, they often want to know blank number two. What question do they ask? And so a way to think about those things, like who you're talking to, oftentimes that's, all right, who is the audience that you want to talk to, or who are the audience that you serve? Sometimes it's who's the kind of intermediate audience, but that's one place. When I speak with, or when I talk to blank, they often want to know blank number two. And that's one of those places where think about what are the questions that you get. Think about what is a question you asked once upon a time before you had your idea. You can think of it in terms of, one of the things I do when I'm working with clients on this, I'm like, well, what's the wrong question? Because that one almost always gets people, where you're like, oh, people are asking this question, but that's the wrong question. I'm like, yes, and you still have to start there because that's the question they have right now. I don't care what it is that you do or what it is that you sell. You have to solve the problem people think they have before you can solve the problem they have, which means you have to give them an answer to the problem they think they have, which means you have to know, like, even if it's the quote unquote wrong question, you have to start there. Because if they don't feel like you're going to give them an answer to that, they're not going to listen to you. Because if you come in and you're like, that's the wrong question, they're going to be like, well, you're a jackass and I don't want to listen to you, because people want to feel like that they're smart, capable, and good. That's how I like to frame it. Like, that desire to feel smart, capable, and good is one of the most powerful forces in the universe. The only one that's stronger is the desire for everything to stay in balance, homeostasis. But this is a basic human need to we think that we are smart, capable, and good. We want to be smart, capable, and good. And even if we don't think we're smart, capable, and good, we want to be seen as smart, capable, and good. So it's one of the reasons why, if you're trying to explain something to somebody or kind of say why your thing is a solution that people haven't thought of before, one of the worst things to do is be like, well, you're asking the wrong question. The right question is X. Like, you need to bring them to that point where they understand that. Sorry, I got a little soapboxy there.
Tamsen, this is Dave. I got the pleasure of listening to your previous interview with Max.
Yeah.
It was worth 3 beers, by the way, 45 minutes. But I like the way you brought it about solving the problems of perspective. And I think that's what you're talking about now. Get that word in there.
So
I really like that.
That's actually the next thing, right? So for thinking through this idea, so, you know, I in order to help it make it easier for people to find the right thread, I kind of came up with this tool that I call the conversational case. And what I found is by getting people to fill in these blanks, it ends up being a little bit easier for them to kind of find these core pieces. And I know we haven't talked about what the core pieces are, but honestly, if you just fill in some of these blanks, you're going to get there easier. So the first one is, you know, when I'm talking with some audience, right? Second one is, you know, they often want to know blank this question. There's kind of an optional third blank, which is so they can, which is they want to know this question or the answer to this question so that they can achieve whatever this other thing is. And then, Dave, to what you're talking about, kind of, well, back to the story structure I mentioned earlier, kind of those 3 first questions, who you're talking with, what they want to know, and why, are establishing kind of the context of any story. It's the first question that people want to hear. The first thing that their brains are looking for is, who is this? Who is the main character? And what is it that they want? And so I call this, as part of the red thread, the goal, because as soon as we know what somebody wants in a story, that's when it really starts, right? So you can think about, you can think about, I've learned that not everybody has these pop culture references. So Star Wars, like we know that like Luke wants to be a pilot, right? Like that's the first thing that he wants. And then we introduced all these other things. More recent, Harry Potter, we know that Harry wants to be kind of loved and part of something else. And as soon as we get that want established in our heads, then we start to care about what's happening. So those first 3 questions, when I speak with, they often want to know so they can, that establishes that first block. The next big part of any story, once we know what a character wants, the next big turning point, the next big thing that moves that plot forward in a story is the introduction of a problem that people didn't know they had. And this is important when you're talking about your idea, your product, your service, and how to set it apart, because yeah, it's important for it to solve a problem that people know they have. That's what makes it relevant. But the moment that you start to articulate how it solves a problem that they didn't know they had, that's when it becomes remarkable. So what I find, Dave, with this problem, this kind of piece of an ideas story that we put into place, is that most often that's a problem of perspective, as you mentioned it. I call it a problem of perspective. Because typically if your idea is an answer and it solved a question that you had way back when you were inventing your idea or you're coming up with it in the first place, there was a moment almost always where you realized that everybody else was focused over here, but you're like, wait a minute, if we pay attention to what's happening over here, then we've got a really, really different answer in play. So that's why in this conversational case thing, kind of the next 2 things I suggest people fill in. So when I speak with, they often want to know so they can. The next 2 things to fill in are, when looking for that answer, they often focus on blank more than on blank, right? And that can help you start to get that problem perspective. It's not perfect. I mean, my clients and I oftentimes, the first of a 90-minute call is really try to get that piece established. And actually, a lot of times it's even just figuring out who the people really are. But the way to think about this problem of perspective is, think about any time you've seen a visual, an optical illusion, right? Something like, two faces in a vase, or like the old woman, young woman, you know what I'm talking about? And what can happen is, my favorite one is something that's called the rabbit duck illusion. So I think you could probably imagine it in your mind. It's a drawing that when you pull it, when you bring it forward, all of a sudden you realize, and you see it, you see either a duck or a bunny, like in the same image. And so what I like to represent to people is like, this is really the kind of mental image I want you to have when you think about how to introduce a problem that people didn't know they have. Totally unscientific experiment here is that most people see the duck first. If I put that image up and don't call it the rabbit duck illusion, most people actually see the duck first. And so I say, listen, there's a good reason why your audience, when they're trying to find the answer to whatever question they have, where they're focused on the duck. But all you have to say to someone when you show them that image is, there's another animal there. Do you see it? They're like, oh, wait a minute. Or you can even say, there's a rabbit there too. Do you see the rabbit? Now you can get them to shift their perspective without making them feel wrong for seeing the duck in the first place, because the duck was there. So this kind of, this idea of saying, okay, when people are looking for that answer, they're often focused on X more than on Y, allows you to do a couple things. One, it allows you to validate your audience's current perspective on what they're doing. It allows them, you allow them to feel good about what they've done so far. They're like, oh, okay, it makes sense that I was focused on this. And when you think about it that way, as duck bunny, right? You're not saying they're wrong. The bunny is also there. It allows you to introduce a new perspective that's still consistent with how they see the world. And I got to tell you, that is honestly the trick. Like, if there's one magic thing about the red thread, it's that ability to introduce a new idea within the context of what somebody already wants and already believes. So that's a kind of a quick-ish way to introduce that. But does that answer your question, Dave, or raise others?
Well, it always raises more, but yes, thank you. Perspective. My perspective is better now.
Thank you, David.
Excellent.
And thank you for leaving that question on LinkedIn. I was saying earlier, I always do a preview, and that's your opportunity to kind of submit whatever questions you have. It helps Tamsen prepare, and she did a lot of replies to people. And, selfishly, to be honest, it helps promote the show and get more brilliant people here. Look, for the question rate here is disturbing. You're all drinking. I assume you have questions. I assume your minds are going. We've only got Tamsen for a short time, and she's very expensive to bring back. So,
yeah, Tamsen, I'm going to say goodbye. I have triple booked, but I had to come by and say hi. It's always brilliant to hear you.
Love that, Steve. Thanks so much for
everybody.
stopping by.
Steve, thank you for upping the ratio of best-selling authors. I appreciate it.
Tamsen, I have a question. This is Dave Meyer in Minneapolis.
Hey, Dave.
Hey, keeping up with the Daves. One of the things that I'm trying to do with my clients right now is help them see ways they can pivot. So knowing that they're there and that they've done something very well a long time, but there's got to be a new way, given the current environment, for them to take what they do and apply it to a different sector or to just do something differently. Can you help provide some insight on how you might help a company pivot?
Sure. So and I've introduced some of these concepts already. So the first thing, remember what I said, where I really see an idea as an answer, right? So your idea, whether it's a concept, a product, or service, is an answer. Your idea, even in a situation that we find ourselves right now, and I am the full belief that your idea, what you do and what you stand for, should not change, even in a situation like this. Because think about, you all probably know this, but what are the strongest muscles in your body? Assuming that you are a fully abled human, the strongest muscles in your body are the muscles that you use the most. And even if you're not, if you're able to walk, then your strongest muscles are your legs. If you're able to wheel a wheelchair, then your strongest muscles are in your arms. The strongest muscles are the ones you use the most.
I believe it's the tongue, Tamsen. Final answer.
Well, you use that the most, don't we? We talk more than anything else.
No, I think it's scientific. I think the strongest muscle in your body is somebody Google that for me. I want to make sure I'm getting credit.
And there would be a reason why, right? Because it actually is one of the things that you use the most. And I'd love it if it is, because that way it can be true no matter like what somebody's physical abilities are. The same thing is true for your idea, right? Whatever your answer is, wherever you have built up your domain of authority, meaning wherever your expertise is, wherever you have spent most of your time, that's where your muscles, metaphorical as they may be, are the absolute strongest. And so what breaks my heart is people thinking that they have to suddenly develop new muscles in a situation like this. And I think that's actually the worst thing that you could probably do. The instinct is right. You're like, well, how do I do this new thing? Because people have this new need, but they don't need a different answer. They just need a different map. See, your message is a map. Your message is always the connection between somebody's question and your answer. And so the thing that you need to be thinking about right now is not how do I change my answer? It's how does my answer relate to this different question, right? So I was talking with, a speaker the other day, and her main focus is depression, right? So if she's trying to get people, most of the time, like when people are booking her, they have a specific interest in, coping mechanisms around depression. And she's like, well, do I need to suddenly, because if people are like, expand my expertise into mental health? She's like, I'm not comfortable with that. I don't have as much expertise in mental health generally. She's like, I know this, I know depression. That's what I know. And I said, well, all we have to do is find the different question that people are asking right now. Remember, that's the first piece of this kind of conversational case is what question are they asking? And she just thought about it for a minute. She's like, well, she's thinking about companies. She's like, well, they're asking, what are some of the coping mechanisms I can give my people in this time of stress? They may not have depression, but they may be looking for coping mechanisms. And she's like, I can talk about coping mechanisms all the day long. She's like, I may have come to them from depression. And so she can talk about them, again, from a position of strength. But now she's just trying to find a different path from a different question. So Dave, what I would say to you, and I would say to other people who are looking to pivot, is like the only thing you should be pivoting is the question you're answering, not the core idea. We need to be thinking about how do you draw a different path to what you talk about from where people are right now, not how do you fundamentally change something that you do. And because continuing that analogy of the muscles, right? Any fundamentally new message is by definition weak because you haven't built the muscles to support it yet. It's going to be weak not only for you, but it's going to be weak compared to other people who that is their main focus. There have been people, for instance, I'm seeing a lot of, in the speaking area, for instance, been people who, let's say their expertise was cheese making. It wasn't, but like the person I'm thinking about, like, let's say that they've always been a cheese maker, and now they're like, well, now I'm a virtual presentation expert. I'm like, no, you're not. No, you're not. Like you're a cheesemaker that had to figure this out. But there is somebody out there, and there's many somebodies out there who do have the muscles of virtual presentation experts. And it doesn't mean that your cheese making muscles aren't worth anything right now. We have to figure out where are the lessons of cheese making that apply to right now. Don't change what you do, change how you bring people to what you do. I think to me that's the big thing I would say about pivoting. Don't do something new. Change the way that you talk about it.
That's incredibly helpful. Thanks, Tamsen.
You're welcome.
I would just say right now.
Might I suggest oh, never mind. We don't need a controlled 5-second pause. We've got Stephanie here.
David too. David, you want to do rock, paper, scissors?
Yeah, David got his.
Oh, go right ahead.
What do you got?
I'm a rock.
Understanding the map is definitely changing right now, but how are you noticing too, just storytelling in general, given the nature of we've lost tools and resources, i.e. predominantly body language, human interaction, being able to sense, a lot that goes into, I think, appropriate, ideation and sharing of that. And then what are you noticing, I think, has been ways of being able to just pivot your map making skills at this moment in time?
So it's metaphorically, I would say, think of it this way, that the maps still need to serve the same purpose. The tools may change, but the function of the map needs to stay the same. So I've seen a lot of folks in all sorts of industries kind of like suddenly invest probably more money than they have right now, given that there's less money coming in. I'm like, well, suddenly I need to build up a virtual studio. I'm like, do you though? Because, the thing is, like, if the content isn't strong, if the message isn't strong, if the idea isn't strong, it doesn't matter how like fancy and whiz bang it is if like the content isn't good enough to keep people's attention in the first place. So I go back to what's the function of the message and what's the function of the message? What are you trying to get people to do? And the function of a message is to make the case that your answer is the answer to somebody's question. So yeah, so I know I'm sure that's very unsatisfying from like a tactical standpoint. What can you do? From a tactical standpoint, what you can do is make sure that your message is as strong as possible, right? And that you are on point with it as much as possible. Because the biggest thing in this virtual environment that you have to battle against is multitasking. And if people are doing multiple things all the same time, like they don't have time and patience to listen to you faff around as you try to figure out what your idea is. Like you need to know what it is. You need to know how to get to it quickly. And you need to have established some of the most powerful ways that you could frame that idea, as you can. So I would say, obviously it's my bias, but you focus on the message first, because content, and this was true even when it was live delivery, great content will actually always trump poor delivery in the long term over time. We will listen to someone who is monotone and like looking down all the time if what they're talking about solves a problem for us and if it answers the questions that our brains are looking for. So we judge kind of the performance aspect, the delivery of stuff first. We like that's our first reaction, but we'll actually set it aside if we're like, but okay, fine, but they're answering a question I have right now, so I'm going to listen to it. So in my mind, the first thing to solve is how well do you answer that question? And then you can layer in the other stuff from there.
Tamsen, along those lines, I just want to make sure, number one, it's okay that I've got your Tamsen Webster rationalization trap in my book, but
Yes.
in case you didn't see that one,
I love.
But
by the way,
you changed my life when you were talking about the rationalization trap, and it really forced me to talk to all my clients about simplifying, which you're talking about clarity. But am I correct in the way I talk about it in the book? I say that basically people are looking for reasons to say no.
100%, because I mentioned it in passing earlier, but the most powerful force in the universe is something that scientists refer to as homeostasis, and that is the desire to keep things in balance. In other words, to keep things the same. Some folks know this, but I spent 13 years of my life as a Weight Watchers leader. Whole other story. But that meant that I had, a lot of really firsthand experience with people trying to change like lifetimes of habits in order to achieve something that they really, really wanted. And so that's hard when everything, particularly when it comes to weight loss or to health, it's hard when everything in your body, down to a cellular level, not even a psychological level, though that's significant too, but at a cellular level is trying to keep you exactly where you are. How do you overcome that? And so the rationalization trap is because it comes down to this fact that, humans aren't rational decision makers. They're rationalizing decision makers. We make these initial decisions based on gut, instinct, emotion, whatever. And then we talk ourselves into or out of why whatever we did or didn't do was the right decision. You can see this everywhere, and particularly right now, right? Whether it's politics or whether it's the response to the pandemic, everybody is convinced that they are right. And because they're convinced that they're right, as far as they're concerned, they are right, right? And so that's why this rationalization piece comes into play. If you are asking someone to do something different, then whatever you say to them has to be strong enough to withstand that test of them trying to talk themselves out of it. And that's why I say that your message needs to be not only relevant, right? It needs to not only answer a question that people have right now, and needs to be remarkable, right? They need to see how it's different from something they've seen before. That's how they're going to pay more attention to it. But it also has to be resilient enough to stand that rationalization that's going to come at it. And there's actually two ways that it has to do that. One is this emotional rationalization, like it has to pass that gut check first. If something doesn't feel right to somebody, they're going to dismiss it out of hand. And that gut check comes with, like, if it's not relevant, they're not going to pay attention to it. If it's not remarkable, they're also probably not going to pay attention to it, because again, the way that we're wired is this directly going to affect me? No, not paying attention. Is it different than what I'm seeing out there? Because we're wired to see what's different. No, also not going to pay attention. But if it is relevant and if it is remarkable, then the next thing that's going to have to be there to pass that gut check is whether or not it kind of feels right to them, whether or not it's close enough to how they live their life right now. And that's why it has to be aligned with what people already want, what they already believe, what they already do, with what they already think. And that blows a lot of people's minds, because they're like, wait, I'm trying to get them to do something different. Shouldn't I try to change what they want and believe? No, you've got to figure out how to put your new thing within the context of how they see the world right now. That is long-term, the safest, strongest way to get your message across. So it has to check that emotional box, which, by the way, like the last piece of that is whether or not any pieces of that mental story are missing, right? If they don't feel like it gives them what they want, if it isn't consistent with what they're doing right now in some way, if it isn't consistent with what they believe to be true about the world at kind of a fundamental value level, then they're going to dismiss it. They may not know why they're dismissing it, but they're going to be like, it doesn't feel right. So it has to have those pieces. And then it has to be strong enough to withstand the intellectual test that's going to come after, right? Because they may say, okay, in that moment, they're like, yes, this is awesome. And we've probably already always all felt this, right? We read a book, we saw a talk or whatever, and we're like, this is awesome. It's great. And then you don't do it, right? Have you ever had that experience where you're like so fired up after you see somebody and then you don't end up doing it? It's because at some level, rationally, some rational part of you is like, well, that may have been true for them, but it's not actually true for me. Or, yeah, I get it. I get that it's a great idea, but it's not worth it for me. Or, I get it, but you know what? There's actually, if I think about it, what they said to support it, I mean, it may be true for their clients, but it's not real. I don't see that true. So that's why it also has to withstand that rational test too. So, that's why that conversational case piece, I put it into play, was just like, it's an easier way to kind of think through, how do you make sure that in a short version of your message, you kind of hit all of those blanks that somebody's looking for, both emotionally and rationally.
I'd like to propose a controlled 5-second pause, because what I've learned is there's personalities out there that need that pause. And, the type A personalities will take these things over if we don't, you know what? Everybody drink your drink. Why don't we do that? Why don't we just do a group drink? Cheers. Cheers to Tamsen. Thank you so much. Not that we're dismissing you yet.
Excellent. Is this helpful for folks? Is this useful for people? Okay.
Jeff, you had a comment.
Yes.
Jeff Deckman, everybody, another best-selling author. I don't know how I do it. They're here, though.
You're good looking and charming.
Thank you, Jeff.
Well, first of all,
I told you not to wear the hat, Max.
First of all,
that's alpaca. That's 100% alpaca, ladies and gentlemen. Talk me out of it.
I started laughing right at the beginning because you just so busted me on all of my issues and challenges, and Max and Katrina and Susan have been suffering through that. But so thanks for helping me to see me. And what you were talking about before about making it make sense to them. What I was thinking about was the challenge is to find out what their real desire is. Because for me, there's desire, and then there's this thing I say I want, but that thing that I say I want is actually what I think is going to satisfy my desire.
Yeah.
So are you talking about like listening in a way where you're kind of sifting through the words they're saying to interpret what they're actually meaning behind it and showing up to that?
You are, and that kind of deeper desire shows up in two ways. One is, so the real test when you say, when I'm talking with, they often want to know, is that the first, think about it this way. When you first meet someone, are you willing to do a trust fall with them? No, right? Like it's the same thing if you're a speaker, whatever. It's like the more that you know someone, the more that you're willing to give them and the more that you're willing to reveal to them. So that's why when you first talk to somebody at the beginning of your message, you really have to use the language they're using at the surface. If they're saying they're trying to get better results or they're trying to get a better report or whatever, then you have to talk to them at that level first. And you may be able to introduce like a deeper desire behind that. Like, okay, you want to get better, you want to get a better report out of your system so that you can kind of show your value to the organization. Like, even then you're kind of just slipping in a little bit about why they might be asking it. But you're not going to be able to say, so, when I'm speaking with like salespeople, they often want to know, am I really good enough? They are not asking that question out loud. They may be asking it internally, but if you start with that, there's going to be some people who are with you, but most people are like, no. Again, remember the smart, capable, good piece. They're like, no, I want you to, you're new to me. I need you to see me as smart, capable, and good. So I'm going to be like, I am totally fine right now. What are you talking about? And so where that kind of deeper desire can show up is in something I call like the free prize, which is once you've already kind of convinced someone, you've persuaded them that your answer is an answer to their stated question. After that, you can kind of say, and you know what? Hey, I've also happened to notice that for some people, it does this thing too. Then you can kind of throw in this kind of like thing that is actually the real reason they're looking for all this or the thing they actually need, even if it's not what they want. And then it just feels like this extra kind of doubling down on why this decision that now you have ideally kind of emotionally made for them. Like they're like, well, yeah, now I get this extra thing. This thing is extra. And they don't have to admit them to themselves or to you that that's actually what they're looking at in the first place. So here's the thing. I never presume, and this is actually something that I did learn in my 13 years of Weight Watchers, that I've learned to not presume that I actually know what people really, really want. I have to take them at face value. Because if you don't take someone at face value, if you don't, like I said before, if you don't answer the question that they say they have, then they don't trust you enough to actually allow you to answer the deeper question. They have to say, are you listening to me now? Are you listening to what I'm actually saying to you? I'm saying to you, I need a better report. I'm saying to you, I need a better way to say this thing. I'm saying to you, I need an answer to this problem. And if you're like, hold on to that, let me answer this other problem first, like they're going to be like, you're not listening to me. And so they're not going to be willing to hear something new if you're not willing to validate where they are right now. And so there's absolutely a place, Jeff, for that kind of larger thing that is really probably what's going on. I just find that I find much better success when I add that as kind of an unexpected benefit afterwards. But I lead with what they say the issue is.
Mm-hmm. A Tamsen practical application of that. I lost a deal because this was when I was positioned as a content strategist. Someone came to me and said, what I really need is a content strategy. And I was thrilled. I was like, got this one in the bag. And 2 days later, and I did my presentation. It was great. 2 days later, she said, oh, well, we ended up going with a messaging strategist because we need to do the messaging before the content strategy. Now, my content strategy started with messaging, but I didn't go that extra mile after answering the question and say, well, what do you really need? And the answer would have been, I need to clearly articulate our value proposition or, whatever that more strategic element was.
And that's an opportunity back to Dave, who I think was asking about the problem of perspective. That's actually that would have been your opportunity, right? People say, so people are asking me, you're asking me, this is not a point you have to say, when I talk with folks like you're just like, so you're asking me like, hey, what's the best way to achieve a content strategy? There's an opportunity there to say, well, most people focus on the content, like the blog posts, the status updates and all of this, the white papers, et cetera. but there's actually something that precedes that content, and that is what is the message that content's supposed to deliver. And you could say it's essentially an input output problem. And so the kind of the truth, which is the next big section of that story that our brains are looking for, which is, you would find your own words for it, but it's kind of garbage in, garbage out, right? Like whatever you put in is what you're going to get out. And it's like, if you don't pay attention to the quality of what you're putting into your content, if that message isn't strong to begin with, then the content doesn't matter how like tactically good it is or SEO wise that it's successful. If it's actually not representing what you wanted to get out to the marketplace, it's never going to work. So that's why when I work with you, even though we're going to build content strategy, step one is to figure out what the message is. And that would have been a way to kind of pivot them, like without, so kind of to Jeff's question, like, they actually need messaging, but you have to start them from content. And you have to say, hey, there's a reason why looking at content is important. Like that's what people actually read. But you're asking about, I'm going to bet that the reason why you're asking about content is because you're actually making sure that content gets a message out. Because like I know, this is a shared belief that we have, that if the message isn't strong, the content can't possibly be strong. Or if we don't have our message defined, the content isn't going to define it for us. So we actually need to back up and define that message. Yeah. And so that's where we start. And so, I mean, that's kind of the way that I tend to think about it, is that there's usually a couple different places that you can insert that perspective. That's why it's problem of perspective. But yeah, I mean, a lot of times we have to find, one of the ways I've described it in the past is we have to message for the middle, right? This isn't about tying what you do exclusively to what people are asking about. And that's just as dangerous as never including your audience in what you say. What we actually have to do is we have to find that bridge, as I'm saying. Like, they have a question, you have an answer, and your message is the thing that connects those two things together. And so that's why kind of in that course of the red thread, or the course of that conversational case I've been talking about, you're actually kind of slowly pivoting them from where they are to where you are. But every mechanical piece that you're putting in there is actually based on something they do right now. And that's how it keeps from feeling like too forced on them, because they're like, well, that's true. I do focus on that. I am, we did ask for content. And here is why we're asking for content. And you're right. The content represents a message. And I agree with you. I share this belief with you that like the content is only going to be as strong as the message is. So you're right. Oh, I love hearing that you're going to start the content strategy from the message point.
Yeah.
So you see, just by doing that, you've kind of come to that point. It just meant that probably somebody else did that pivot better than you did then, but I know you're better at that now. So.
Yeah. So Tamsen, I want to give people the opportunity to ask one or more questions, but I do want to tell all my regulars that you're not excused yet. We're going to let Tamsen go. And then I want to say, so I got something to say to all of you. Mostly thank you, but I got to.
Well, I kind of want to stick around for that though.
Well, then fine. You know what? You can be here, too, Tamsen. And you know what? Why don't I get this out of the way right now? Look, Tamsen is brilliant, as you can see. And if you go to her website, like, you'll see what I'm talking about. But in order to get people like Tamsen coming back, and we've got David Baker coming up, the best agency consultant. Awesome. I'm an agency consultant. A lot of you pay me to say that David Baker is the best agency consultant I've ever met. That's what I'm telling you. He's coming next week. We got Colleen Francis. We got Matt Hines. He's got a new book coming out with Wiley, Predictable Pipeline. Helped him out a little bit with that. But these are brilliant people. And if they show up and there's 2 or 3 of you on this call, that's not going to make Max look good. Tamsen had a great experience. She helped out some people. She might even tell someone else that's brilliant to come along. So what I need from you is, when I do the preview for David Baker on Monday, when I launched on LinkedIn, go drop a comment. And if you know somebody brilliant, not your cousin Barry, that's just like a random person. If you know somebody brilliant, tell them about Beers with Max. Get them in here. Many appreciates. That's all I had to say. And thank you so much you're all doing this already. So I'm just saying I appreciate it. And thank you.
I think you need to create a little bit of prize structure out of that. And whoever has the best question by end of day Monday gets a beer by Friday. I mean, you
Then
could pull this off.
that's the
You
way
can
we'll
do
do
this.
it. And I am aware of a service where I can send beer to people. I am
Just
I
teasing.
know you could set like Drizzly. Drizzly's awesome. Like you could send alcohol to people. I do
Or
that.
shots. I'm just saying.
It's self-serve shots these days.
Grizzly.
Absolutely. Drizzly, yeah, Drizzly's awesome app where you can. I have sent tequila cross country before. Well, basically, what they'll do is they'll tell you what's at a shop that's like a liquor store that's local to the person that you're sending, and you can kind of like pick it and they'll deliver it to their door.
You just opened Pandora's box.
I probably shouldn't explain how much I know about liquor delivery, but
no one on my list of target clients is safe.
this is great. This is why it's awesome.
That was worth
Yeah,
the mission.
I mean, it's and I got to say, like, I spent 5+ years in agencies. So like, this is a lot of what I'm talking about is kind of rooted in the frustration of the clients that we worked with, but also a lot of times the frustration in how do you represent as an agency, what it is that you do differently for people than everybody else. Because, you know, when it comes to what you actually deliver, right? Like, that's not different. Like you're delivering creative, you're delivering media buys, you're delivering whatever. And so really all you have that's different is your approach. I worked for an agency that tried to say it was their people. And I'm like, no, it's like your people are not like, they're awesome, but it's only to the extent that your people deliver something for your clients, that your clients actually care about that. So the more that you can articulate your worldview, like the better it is. And really that's all everything I talk about is about. Yes, Max.
No, controlled pause. We've got some type Bs out there. They want to say something. Look, Ethan, there he is.
Hey, I got a question.
Okay, I'll go.
Or whoever said I'll go. Feel free.
Ethan was first.
All right.
You get in line.
All right. So I come from an operations and a production planning background, and I'm shifted in factual numbers a lot of the time. So one of the moments I have in moments of brevity to change and alter a perspective is, do I present factual evidence or try to change an emotional feeling behind something?
Yeah, it's what's the classic line that's facts tell, stories sell. And I think that's true even in very short form. And so here's what I say, like, I think it's possible in a sentence, and I actually challenge my clients to do this. Like, can you express the idea, the value proposition of the idea in an old school tweet or less, right? 140 characters or less. And in that 140 characters or less, can you include both what is desired and different about your answer? In other words, how can you in 140 characters say, hey, this gets you what you want via a means you didn't expect? Now that's hard if you start there, right? Like a lot of times I see this, you know, and I don't see this in agencies so much because most agencies know that there's a whole bunch of strategy comes behind a tagline or a phrase or something like that. But you know, the average person trying to do some of this stuff for themselves oftentimes tries to start with that line or that phrase or that word or whatever. And to me, that's the equivalent of trying to like blow up a low res image, right? We've all tried to do that. We found the perfect image for something. We tried to blow it up, but when we blew it up, it was pixelated and crappy looking because there literally wasn't enough data in that file in order for it to survive at scale. And the same thing can happen if you try to find like a line without having done all the work behind it. So I think when it comes to like, how do I get my point across in a way, you actually have to do a little bit of that thinking of, okay, what question they have right now? Like, how are they approaching it right now? What is another way they could approach it that isn't going to set off the alarm bells in their head? What's a reason that they would agree that that's the right reason? Not the one that I want them to agree with, but why would they agree with it right now? Okay, how do I build that to say, okay, this is the answer? Because the way that I suggest doing this a lot of times is to lead with, you know, the short version. And it's not analytical, but I can give you an example where, you know, I have a client who says, you know, that if you want people to perform at their potential, you have to develop leadership at every level. That gives them something people want via means they don't expect, right? Okay, I want people to perform at their potential, but I haven't heard this leadership at every level piece before. Let me hear more about that. And it's at that point they're willing to give you a little bit more space, right? But the same thing can be true of a product, right? So of a company who says that, you know, They help people stay on critical medications longer by helping people see the results that they can't feel. Again, something that people want, stay on critical medications longer, something they don't expect, see the results that they can't feel. Now, both of those need a larger explanation behind them, but a lot of times if we don't have that kind of opening shot, as I like to call it, that actually engages their interest and engages their curiosity, that goes, this is something that I want, and it's kind of remarkable, I haven't heard that before, then they don't have a reason to keep listening. And as long as we've opened that curiosity gap, as long as we've opened a reason for them to go, well, you tell me more, well, that's when we're in a golden, well, that's interesting, tell me more. Like, that's what you want. And so even if you're trying to say, okay, I know the situation here, and factually I know this is true, this little baby story of here's an outcome, here's an unexpected answer makes you go, what? So my favorite example of this is actually an 8-word story by E.M. Forster, who wrote Howard's End and things like that. And he wrote a story, and these are the 8 words. The king died, and then the queen died. And your brain is like, wait, okay, what happened? Why did they die? Who died when? Like, died of what? What was the time horizon? And the thing is, like, you can, like, if you know the rest of the story from a factual standpoint, like, if you just give people that little bit, they're going to be able to tell me more. And once they've said, tell me more, then you've got them in a position of openness. And that's when that kind of longer case can come into play.